about transistors. You know, we deal with them every day with our Walkmans and TVs, so forth and so on. So that's all a semiconductor is. But one of the problems with the transfer of energy is that you have heat dissipated. Okay, that's one of the problems. So they found that there's certain materials that you can make, certain combinations of different metals that you can make. When you cool them down to a minus 459.4 degrees Fahrenheit, they lose all their resistance and electricity will flow through them. Electrons will flow and not generate heat. Okay, that's called a superconductor, in that it conducts electricity and no heat is generated, so it's very efficient. But the irony is it's very cost ineffective because you have to continuously supply liquid helium. And liquid helium is expensive because you have to condense helium gas down to a liquid state, and you have to go through a whole lot of processes, and so it's just cost ineffective. And because of the way Western science looks at things, they had a psychological barrier that nothing could be made superconducting above that temperature, less known room temperature or body temperature. But in 1972, in a journal called Physiological Chemistry and Physics, a naval engineer, Freeman Cope, suggested that melanin is a natural organic superconductor because of how efficiently it transduces energy from one form to another form. And now they have made several materials that are organic. They synthesize some organic materials that are superconducting, but the problem is they're superconducting at extremely low temperatures. Recently, the psychological barrier that Western science puts on things was destroyed when some Japanese, seems like the Japanese are really moving in this, developed some materials that superconduct at liquid nitrogen temperatures, which is about 167 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 167 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, melanin is a superconductor. Because of its structure, it's also a superatom because it's so stable. It can't be, it's very difficult to destroy it completely, to pierce through its structure. So, melanin is an organic superconducting superatom. Now that's deep, because that speaks to why it's been so important for life on Earth, and why at some point it's been identified that there are many organic molecules in the dust clouds of interstellar space. In fact, I just found out just this past week that some white scientists, now I don't know how they did this, but I'm not offending anyone, but I don't know how they did this, but they stole some of the cobblestone in Mecca. That's right. They stole some of the cobblestone in Mecca. You talk about a violation, that's absolutely unreal. But what did they do with it? They took it back to the lab and analyzed. This was in the late 1800s, and I have the paper if anyone wants to look at it after the lecture. They took it back to the lab, and what did they find? They found life in there. They found bacteria. They found amino acids present in the meteorite. They found viruses in meteorites from all over the world. Now my lecture today is on solitons and melanin. I'm not going to talk about that because that's a whole other thing. But anyway, it raised a whole lot of issues that African people have had for a long time, that life comes down. And now we know that the earth has been inundated with micro icy comets, and that's how the waters of the oceans form, the waters of the Nile River formed, which they in fact say. So melanin has a whole host of different properties. The last one is that it is extremely stable. It acts like a soliton. I'm going to explain that in a few minutes. Next slide, please. This represents a rain of information. Every day we have to deal with this. Information comes to us, and that cloud is representing the metaconscious. Now, what does that word mean? We've heard unconscious, subconscious, superconscious, non-conscious. You know, yeah, it's really strange, something that's non-conscious. That's just totally out the ordinary. Something that's non-conscious, but metaconscious is a bit more specific. And one of the things that's coming out of this conference, which I really like, are terms that are a bit more specific, where we all, based on whatever our level of training, whatever our religious persuasion is, we can understand one another and not get into an extended dialogue that could be counterproductive. So we're coming up with very specific terms to describe things. And metaconscious is such a term. That simply means everything that's conscious. I mean, the total realm of consciousness states that a human being experiences. Conscious simply means the particular state that a person happens to be in at any given moment. That means where your attention is focused. And so we see that we are being just like being in a monsoon of information. We have no idea of how much information that we take in, compress, translate, stored to be used at a later date. So with that, we have to give some definition to what reality, consciousness, information is. We have to first understand that reality is a product of the dialogue between human consciousness and the physical environment, which is that whole metaconscious thing. It's a holistic process, and the vocabulary for understanding this relationship is information. And information is on many different levels. Consciousness, human consciousness, can insert information into the environment as well as extract information out of it. Okay? What I mean by consciousness is all categories of human experiencing, processing, including perception, cognition, intuition, instinct, emotion, at all levels. And I'm using that as an unbounded term. I'm not going to get hung up in any current Western psychological literature definition for consciousness. Environment is the metaconscious, or all circumstances influencing, surrounding the consciousness which it perceives. That's very important to be separate from it. In this way, environment comprises a multi-dimensional hierarchy of contexts within which consciousness may function, beginning with its own physical corpus and extending successively to its physical environment, to all other consciousness, and finally to remote influences that in any way may condition its experiences. Information is all physical, intellectual, and emotional currency, or even including nomenclature, that has a capacity to specify or quantify the state of one's consciousness or the environment. And all this is not new. You know, I didn't give you anything that's new because our ancestors have laid all this out before us. So nothing here I gave is new. Now, next slide, please. You can just deal with the top part first. It's fine. Okay. This is just going to focus in on just one aspect. There's been some recent studies that found some profound similarities between the retina of the eye and the pineal gland. In fact, the structures of them are very, very similar. We see that there's a neural pathway from the retina to the pineal, passes through a part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nuclei. And this in turn generates the melatonin rhythm, this whole transduction from the eye to the pineal gland through that certain part of the brain. You can move that up now. Well, we're going to have to accelerate quite rapidly here. This bottom part is showing the melatonin rhythm. Can you move that up a little bit more? The top part is in the winter, and we see during the winter months when there's less light, there's more melatonin within the blood. And the bottom, during the summer, when you have long days, you have less melatonin. This peaks at around 4 a.m. in the morning. Next slide. Okay, this is just showing different types of activity of our nervous system. You have the first one, which is called noise, which is simply uncorrelated firing of neurons. The second, you have coherent waves, like alpha waves, beta waves, that's present in meditation, consciousness states, dream states. Then you have spikes or pulses, which are indicative of certain types of dysfunctions, like epilepsy. And then you have the bottom, which is labeled chaos, and that's normal brain function. Now I told you, it's, I'm dealing a thing here on terms. That simply means that within all of this, that's showing you the integration of all the things that's taking place within us simultaneously at every given moment of any time. But we only focus on a very small part of that seemingly chaos to pick out the order. Next slide. Okay, you can just that right there, that's fine. Just move that part up. Okay, this is showing you cell structure and how information is transferred. You see there's some little things, those, I don't have a pointer, but where that arrow is pointing at where it says glycoproteins, can everyone see that? Okay, and then you have some little lines that look like spines coming up. Well, those assemblies are highly charged ions, and they form an ion antenna. And they're specific for each individual organ. Each organ has its own resonant frequency or signature. Every protein, in fact, acts as a tiny magnet, moving by magnetic motion. Where's Malachi? Magnetic motion. Furthermore, their movement is reflective of the movement of the sun, moon, planets, and stars. Thus, at birth, every living thing has a celestial serial number, or frequency power spectrum. This is the basis for astrology right here. The next slide. Show the top part first. Okay, well that's fine. Okay, this is a representation of wave motion. And now I'm going to explain to you somewhat of what the stability of the melanin molecule means. And it has to do with a state called the soliton state, soliton waves. Don't have time to go into a whole lot of details, but Albert Einstein said that the most beautiful experience of a man is that of mystery. This is the feeling that gives birth to true art and science. Well, for me, soliton waves evoke that feeling because, unlike anything else known in nature, they are not inherently physical matter or energy. I'm going to repeat that. Soliton waves are not inherently physical matter nor energy. Soliton waves are transphysical.